Good morning, everyone. If you weren't here when I just left and got this set up, I hope this all works well. It's been quite a while since I tried to do this back in December. So here we go. We are going to be in Revelation chapter 12 and chapter 13 today. So we're picking up where we left off, and I'll bring us back into the middle of where we're at right now. So you'll have your handout sheet. I have the text here as usual. I will also put the text on the screen as I read it. Okay, and then I will. I don't know what's happening here. Whoop. All right. I'll be reading it as well, and then we'll go through. Sometimes I'm going to put the answers. I'll put the answers to fill in the blanks on the screen all the time, but sometimes the discussion you're just going to have to listen to me because there was just way too much for me to say to actually want to put up on the screen. The first thing we have to deal with here is the matter of the red Welsh dragon. I'm thankful for Joni. Dr. Backus is the one that asked the question. Joni put a few notes for me to put a few notes for me together for me, and I'd already kind of quickly looked at it, and because you can find information on the internet about anything pretty fast. The Welsh red dragon has absolutely nothing to do with the red dragon in the Bible, plain and simple. There's a lot of mythological matters that go into English or Great Britain history, the Isles history, and of course Loch Ness Monster is a part of that too. But then of course your knights, King Arthur is actually where it is thought that the idea of the red dragon came from, King Arthur and Merlin. Of course, even though it's such a small land area, the British Isles, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and then down by where London is, that's seen a lot of history, a lot of wars. Each of those were their own kingdoms, and they had their own kings. And at some point, right around 5th or 6th century, is when the red dragon seems to have originated, going back to the time when the Roman Empire actually had come all the way to the British Isles, and of course that was Hadrian and Hadrian's Wall. So there's a connection there. But I'm looking at some dates here: early 5th century, 600s, around that time. And then it shows up again around the 1100s and 1200s. It's there. Of course, now the Prince of Wales, of course, is the heir apparent to the throne and has been for quite some time. It was the House of Tudor that actually had connections, bloodline connections with Wales. And it was Henry VII that had taken the dragon and put it into his heraldry. And of course, Henry VII, not so well known, but Henry VIII certainly is well known. In the House of Tudor, of course, the War of the Roses, and then the whole thing with Henry VIII. By the way, that time frame in Henry VIII, that's during the Reformation. Of course, the English Reformation, then the Anglican Church broke away from the Roman Church during that time as well. I also caught something interesting that during the time of the decolonialization, especially related to in the mid-centuries, right around World War II, and then the time following that, Winston Churchill actually loathed this symbol of the dragon, and it had made its way into different symbolism. But one of the leading Welsh folks in London had said, "We have no connection with, we're not part of the British Isles or anything like that," and that's a way for them to actually feel they have some ownership. But it's interesting when Prince of Charles, if you watch the movie The Crown, and I studied up a little bit too, there was a lot of tension with the Welsh people, especially when Prince Charles became the Prince of Wales. So if you haven't watched The Crown yet, some good things. It's a drama documentary, so not everything might be exactly true. But I think, in my observation, I'm not an expert in English history at all. Seems to do a pretty good job of things. All right, let's get on to the real red dragon in Revelation, and that's where we left off. We had the dragon and the woman. We talked about the woman is not the Queen of Apostles or the Queen of Heaven. It's not Mary. The woman is the church. And the woman was about to give birth to the male child, which of course is the Christ, and the Christ had been taken away up into heaven, and that's where we pick this up. So the Christ has gone into heaven, and now the dragon sets his sights on the woman. Again, remembering the woman is the church. Okay, here we go. So our first section, Revelation chapter 12, the dragon persecutes the woman, on the front of the study guide sheet. When the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman, who had given birth to the male child. 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she might fly to her place in the wilderness, where she is to be fed for a time, times, and half a time, away from the presence of the serpent. And the serpent spewed water out of his mouth, like a river after the woman, in order to carry her away in the flowing water. But the earth helped the woman. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river, which the dragon had spewed out of its mouth. The dragon was angry about what had happened to the woman, and he went away to make war against the rest of her children, those who keep the commandments of God and who hold on to the testimony about Jesus. And he stood on the shore of the sea, which is going to set the stage for the next part of the vision. Remember, we are in the section of the 7 visions, which is going to take us through chapter 15. So again, we're cycling through all these different groupings of 7. Okay, so just as a summary here, as I usually do. So the dragon pursued the woman, the church, right, who was then given wings to fly away to be spared the onslaught of the dragon. The serpent's mouth watered, and it's the idea of, when you're hungry, your mouth starts to water, but so much so the water actually gushes forth. So much that he tried to drown the woman, but the earth actually swallowed up the waters that the dragon was spewing out of its mouth. Now again, we're going to fill in the blanks on these things. All right, let's go to our first idea here. We have a few passages, one from Exodus, one from Psalm, and one from Matthew, which helps us with the next questions. So the Lord said to the Israelites, "You have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you out myself." Psalm 91, with his feathers he will cover you, and under his wings you will find refuge. His truth will be your shield and armor. One passage that was missed here too is from Isaiah, of course, and he will lift you up on eagle's wings, right? You'll soar on wings like eagles, Isaiah 40. And then Matthew 23, the Lord weeping for Jerusalem as he comes down into it. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those sent to her. How often I have wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. So what's the picture idea here? How is God's protection in the above passages pictured? Well, we have wings like eagles, right? We have the wings of the mother that's covering up her young, and you're just going to have to write these down. These are things I did not decide to put in here because there's a few thought here. But this idea of wings, the shelter, it's interesting how this has worked out. I saw a video the other day of a mother chicken, mother hen. I don't know what it was going after. It was going after another kind of bird, or what it was. This mother chicken just tore the other bird apart. It was like some kind of hawk, and this mother chicken just decimated the hawk. Interestingly enough, we had a little hawk incident, and Jennifer was upstairs and happened to be looking out the back windows facing the backyard, and she's like, "Look what's happening outside." And there was a red-tailed hawk that had it looked like it was a baby red-winged blackbird. It was already black feathered, and it was pinning it down to the lawn. And then all of a sudden, because I went out there, I didn't want bird murder going on in my backyard, and I was hoping the hawk would just let it go, but no, the hawk actually picked it up and flew away with it, and it went all the way past the Drumlin Trail. It kept flying, and it's amazing that the hawk could fly with that much additional weight. But anyhow, again, the idea of wings being covered up, we know how birds cover their little ones up like that, or the wings of an eagle, right? It's an Old Testament picture. Again, the church is given here the wings of the eagle. So protection by God, by God's hand. Now I have some examples, or I asked for some examples of church history. More may come to your mind as you think about this more. But God's protecting hand over his church. You think of the persecution of the early church, and how it still was thriving during the time of persecution, how the Lord delivered them, especially during the persecution of St. Paul, how he delivered Paul in various ways throughout his ministry as well. We go later in history, and then you have the emperor that became Christian, Emperor Constantine. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Then through the course of the history of the Christian church, you have many examples. One thinks certainly of the Reformation during that time, and the Lord continues to preserve his church in the midst of persecution in a lot of different ways. Let's not only think about the persecution, but also the false teaching that comes up. The Lord protects, and maybe that's more of the story of the Christian church. Not so much persecution since the time of Emperor Constantine, but protection from false teaching. And of course, the Reformation is a big part of that. But even how orthodoxy still is able to be found, and you go to newer Christian nations and how their orthodoxy has its has a way of growing in those places. So, all right, number 13. Times and a half time. Well, we've seen this several times already, right? It should be times and a half time, not time and a half time. What is that? Of course, this you can write down. That's that 3.5 years, or that 42 months, or that 1,260 days, which is also what we know as the New Testament era. So this is the time when the church, of course, now the woman has her offspring, right? So the church has its children. The members of the church, the believers in Christ, right? They're kind of being born out of the church. So again, we have another description of the devil's work during the time of the New Testament. So from when the time when Jesus goes to heaven to the time when Jesus comes back from heaven on the last day. All right, please turn your page. All right, next question is, what is this river that comes from the mouth of the serpent? This focuses especially what we just saw in the last set of 7 visions, right? What comes out of the mouth, right? Words come out of the mouth. And so the devil is doing most of his time, talking, speaking. And we just imagine this a torrent of falsehood, of lies, of false teaching that's coming out of the devil's mouth, trying to consume the church. And of course, we see the devil's lies in the midst of the church constantly, continually in the false teachings that are out there. Now, what does the earth swallowing up the river seem to indicate? This is kind of an interesting thought. False teaching kind of come and go. They'll be eaten up and replaced by another kind of false teaching. And we've seen that ebb and flow kind of going in the church. And, for a time it was it was Europe. Europe was where the Christian church was. And then it came eventually to America. That's where the missionaries spread it. And then for a long time, Christianity had its stronghold in America, especially Protestant Christianity. Catholicism been kind of all over the place. And of course, now where Christianity is growing the most is in Asia. We don't get to hear much about it. We have our work in Thailand and Vietnam especially in our little church body as compared to the rest of the world. But false teachings will come and go. And, I think about this too. I used to have more time to sit at home back before I was a pastor and adult and all growing up. And, I'd flip through channels and you'd come to, Trinity Broadcasting. You had Benny Hinn on there. Apparently Benny Hinn must still be a thing. I don't know. But I don't think nearly as big as what it once was. You mean the mega churches, you still see Hillsong. It seems like they're just playing, replays over and over and over and over again. That they're kind of losing their edge, so to speak, on that too. And I think the church goes through these transitions, on a repeated basis throughout its history. I mean, it might take a half a century or so, but it does those things. There's certainly patterns in how the church does its work. How society influences a church and how the church influences society has a big impact too. And we especially think about that here in America. One of the main reasons why America was settled was for freedom of religion from the British Isles. They came over here to be able to worship freely, and of course that's been a huge part of the American ideal, the freedom of religion, not just the freedom to be Christian, but the freedom of religion, that all religions can have kind of an equal grounding here in America. And it became, what it is. It's a melting pot of different kinds of religions. Most countries have one main religion, whether it's Catholicism or Protestantism or Anglican, the Anglican Church, the English Church. But here in America, you have all kinds of different denominations and religions going on. So, as such, religion has had a significant influence on the society of America until now, when we're getting to have we're at the point now where we have about equal non-Christians versus Christians, or non-religious versus religious in our society, and we can see the impact that's having. That's just what's happening right now. Of course, the grossest influence of the church and of religion, of Christianity, unfortunately, fundamentalism, that had was the time of Prohibition. That dumb social experiment just did not work, and it failed miserably. But then it led to the Roaring '20s. All right, anyhow, let's not get into American history. Let's see if there's anything else. This idea of those who keep the commands. Boy, we just get really, really weird when we start hearing these work righteous types of things. Those that are saved are those who obey the commandments. But we know, again, what the Bible teaches us about sanctification. That only believers by their faith can render true obedience and works in their perfect form. Works that are done without sin, because their sin has been washed away by the blood of the Lamb. This cannot be describing a civic righteousness, right? So my atheist neighbor over here might be helping the old lady across the street. That's not counting for those who keep these commands. This is definitely speaking of ones who keep who do God's will because of the faith that is in them. So we're talking about believers here, as usual. All right. I'd ask you for questions, but I can't answer you now because I'm doing this on Wednesday and you're doing this on Sunday. Okay. The beast out of the sea is going to give us an awful lot to think about. It's very clear what the beast out of the sea is. It's really not a matter of interpretation, but a matter of considering our context and how it fits with our what we got going on today. All right, sorry. I had to take a little break there. Hopefully you didn't really notice. Okay, here we got the beast out of the sea. This is the beginning of the new chapter, chapter 13. I saw a beast rising out of the sea. He had 10 horns with 10 crowns on his horns, and 7 heads with blasphemous names on his heads. The beast that I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power, his throne, and great authority. One of his heads seemed to have been fatally wounded, but his fatal wound was healed. And the whole world that followed the beast was amazed. They worshipped the dragon because he gave authority to the beast. They worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can go to war against him?" The beast was also given a mouth that spoke arrogant and blasphemous things. He was given authority to do these things for 42 months. The beast opened his mouth to speak blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name, his dwelling, and those who dwell in heaven. He was also given permission to wage war against the saints and to overcome them, as well as authority over every tribe and people and language and nation. All those who make their home on the earth will worship the beast, and those whose names have not been written from the beginning of the world in the book of life which belongs to the Lamb that was slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be imprisoned, he is going to be imprisoned. If anyone is to be killed with a sword, he is going to be killed with a sword. Here, patient endurance and confidence are needed by the saints. All right, let's get into filling in the blanks here in the summary of this section. The beast out of the sea. Continuing from the first of the 7 visions, the dragon, also the devil, right, stood by the seashore. That's where we left him there, and watched as the beast came out of the sea. The beast had 10 horns, 7 heads. On each head there was a blasphemous name. The beast looked like a leopard, but had the feet of a bear and a mouth like a lion. One of the heads of the beast had a fatal wound that had been healed. And people worshipped the dragon and the beast. The beast was given power to wage war against the saints. Okay, let's take up the matter, first of all, of the animal figures that we have. And for this, we go to Daniel chapter 7. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the 4 winds of the heaven, churning up the great sea." See? 4 great beasts, each different from others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground, so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. There before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told to get up, eat your fill of flesh. And after that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. And on its back had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed, devoured its victims, and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there and asked him the meaning of all this. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. The 4 great beasts are the 4 kings that will rise from the earth. But the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. Okay, so what do we got here? We got similarities, don't we? What are the similarities between the vision in Daniel and the vision of Revelation? Of course, the identification of the various animals, right? Lion, bear, leopard. What Revelation seems to be is just a mashing together of all the beasts of Daniel, okay? Which makes a whole lot of sense when we see what we're actually talking about here. Okay, so in Daniel's vision, the Lord tells us exactly what these stand for. These 4 beasts in Daniel's vision reflect the progression of the next 4 major empires who are going to rule the West, and of course then the ancient Near East. Okay, so now let's put this in historical context. During the time of Daniel, that happens during Babylon, right? So that's the first one. I think that'd be the first one, right? Counting backwards here. Yeah, Babylon's the first one. Assyria's out of the picture. So Babylon's the first one, okay? Soon after Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, not much more than a century of power that they had when the Persian Empire came in, and that happened during Daniel's life. And the Persian Empire, Darius the Mede came in. You have Cyrus. You also have the Xerxes, right? Artaxerxes, and Xerxes, the book of Esther, is a part of that. During that time, more people were sent back, more of the exiles were sent back to Jerusalem. So you have Babylon is the first one, Persia the second one. Again, Persia's empire didn't last very long either. And then the next great empire that comes through is Alexander the Great and the Greek Empire. Of course, Alexander then spread out the Greek Empire far too far, and then it broke down. Of course, then his untimely death didn't help things, and there was no progression of succession after that, except for the 4 regional rulers that were going to take place that ended up dividing up the Greek Empire. And number 4 is very specific in that vision too. And then, of course, after the Greek Empire falls, it falls to the Roman Empire, which is going to last for centuries. So the progression of Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome being the major empires that control the West and the ancient Near East, and then even farther east than that, especially the Greek Empire, the Persian and the Greek Empire. So what are we talking about here? We're talking obviously about world powers. And so now what we have in Revelation is we have world powers being mashed together in this monster beast, right? Oh, by the way, here's the progression on the screen of those 4. I should have put that up before, but there you have it. You can see again Babylon, 70 years, Persia, a couple hundred years, Greece, about less than 200 years, and then Rome for about 600 years. I love the depictions here of this. There you have the monster. Now it's interesting to note something about Rome, especially the description of Daniel compared to the description of Revelation, is the Roman one most resembles the devil and the dragon himself, right? With all the horns and the heads and things like that on it, which is, it's kind of an interesting thought. We're going to get to it in just a second. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Okay. So with this in mind, this beast, what is this beast all about? The beast out of the sea that becomes pretty much the devil's number 1 compatriot here. Earthly governmental institutions that will work with the devil against the church. And notice a couple things about how I say this. I don't identify one particular person or emperor, right? It's an institution. Just like when we talk about the Antichrist being the papacy. We're going to get to that a little bit later here too, and we'll bring in the passages from Thessalonians to describe that for us. We don't talk about the Pope being the Antichrist. No, it's the institution of the papacy that is best fit with the description of the Antichrist. Again, we'll talk about that. Same thing here. The beast out of the sea is best to be described as these earthly governmental institutions that are going to work against the church, work with the devil against the church. And history shows us this in a variety of different ways. We think of Rome up until the legalization of Christianity. You think of the time of the Reformation, the Holy Roman Empire fighting against Luther, and then you have the Protestant Wars and the 30 Years' War and those events there. One especially thinks of like Hitler's misuse of religion and Christianity. A lot of people are deluded into the thought that Hitler was a Christian, he even was a Lutheran. No, Hitler was an atheist. If you know anything about your history, which most people today don't know anything about, Hitler was an atheist. He only used the concept of Christianity to try to pacify the people and continue his brainwashing of them. And of course, it's really interesting because most of the commentaries from Revelation are written during the Cold War, which identify communism especially, because communism really went after Christianity. And now we're, of course, seeing it in America today. Certainly more of an outright persecution coming against Christianity, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment too. Okay, so the beast out of the sea, how the devil works with earthly governmental institutions to work against the church. Okay, what characteristics of the beast out of the sea tie him to the devil? You have descriptions, some of the same descriptions, right? I'll put myself down here. You have the idea of the heads, the horns, the crowns, the things like that. In fact, like I said, that last one especially matches up with the dragon especially. So they reflect the devil's power here on earth. They're very, very powerful. That's what horns, the idea is, or the idea of crowns especially too. That gets us to number 4 here. Oops, I actually skipped number 4. I'm sorry. So number 4 on your sheet. Once again, the crowns and the heads of the beast are not crowns of victory. They're not the wreaths, but they're the diadems. Remember what I told you? Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. You think of Emperor Domitian, Diocletian, and of course the papacy now. Earthly rulers who would wear these crowns and set themselves in the place of God. Give examples where leaders of nations have done that, both ancient and modern. Of course, the time of Daniel, right? You had Nebuchadnezzar, you had and Darius too, the 3 men in the fiery furnace. They had to worship the image of God, or they had to actually worship the king. All Egyptians, the Egyptian pharaohs and things were all considered to be gods. The Roman emperors were all considered to be gods. In fact, Pontifex Maximus was not a title for the Pope first. It was a title for the Emperor of Rome first, but then the Pope usurped the title Pontifex Maximus. I would place the papacy in this one as well. One of the things that strikes me is the pomp of Nazism and Hitler. You think of the parades. I mean, in a sense, almost liturgical rite in Nazism, and of course the fascism in Italy with Mussolini, which is something I never understood. How the nationalism and the fascism in Italy, and how that the papacy, the Roman Catholic Church, dealt with all of that, because Italy was on the wrong side of that war. You also have the examples of communism and just the absolute destruction and the persecutions of millions and the killing of millions and millions of Christians in the Soviet Union. Again, the government was king in the Soviet Union. All right, now we go to number 5. What is the fact that there are parts of the 3 ferocious beasts in the beast out of the sea teach us about this beast power? So we're like bringing the worst of these, ancient empires together and mashing them into this one big monster, right? And a power almost equal to the devil. And as I think through this, and of course we don't want to push an overly literalistic interpretation of things, but when I hear this being described as they'll worship the beast, those whose names have not been written in the beginning from the right there, as well as authority over every tribe and people and language and nation. What country in the world's history is one where we can be we could say that it is a country that is full of tribes and peoples and nations and things like that? There has been no country on the face of the earth that is more diverse than America. And that's where we could expect that as we've seen it through the course of history, that one of the manifestations of the beast out of the sea is going to be the government here, if it isn't already. And perhaps even as we get closer to the Lord's day. Again, not being literalistic and saying that the American government is the beast out of the sea, because it's not. In that specific sense, any of these governmental institutions could be characterized as the beast coming out of the sea. So it's the institution of earthly government. And we're going to come to the tension on that. If you're thinking ahead, well, what about this and what about that? I'm going to get to the tension in that in regards to the fourth commandment in just a little bit. Okay, we have some other passages here which now lead us into that idea of, okay, how can the devil do this? How can the devil use something that God has established, earthly authority, right? The fourth commandment, God's representatives here on earth to bear the sword, right? If man sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. How can we put this together that the beast out of the sea, this prime, ally of the devil, is going to be an institution that God has established to do good for his people? Well, that's the submission to the governing authorities is made clear to us in Romans 13, right? Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Plain and simple, right? That's our fourth commandment. That's our doctrine of the two kingdoms right there. But now we have the idea from Job, right? These passages from Job just illustrate for us the devil doing his work. The Lord said to Satan, very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger. At this Job got up, tore his robe, shaved his head, then he fell to the ground and worshipped and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. There's something about that. Did the Lord take anything away? No. The devil took it all away. But what does Job confess? The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. The Lord allows the devil to be taken away. It's conceivable then, obviously, right, that the Lord allows the devil to use the good things that God gives to do things? Absolutely. He does it with all of his blessings. Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. And then what did Job say? If only my grief could be weighed, my devastation placed in the scales with it, they would certainly weigh more than the sand of the sea. No wonder my words have been rash. The arrows of the Almighty stick in me. My spirit drinks their poison. The terrors of God are lined up against me. Again, in Job's perspective, he's being afflicted by God, not by the devil. Well, you can, again, humanly speaking, that makes sense, right? If God allows it, we can say, see why it could be said that this is coming from God. So let's just remind ourselves of this reality. Not only with the blessing of earthly government, but with every blessing God gives us, sin and the devil can turn it into something evil. So think of money, right? The things that God gives us. He's the one who gives us money. It's not money that's the root of all kinds of evil. It's the love of money that's the root of all kinds of evil. God gives us our life. Can we worship our life? And I see a delicate balance in all this. I see it especially with the matter of vaccinations. I see Christians who almost speak in ways that are worshiping the vaccine. Come on. That comes to us from God. God works through, and I mentioned in my sermon tonight too, this is the way God has to work. He's got to work through sin. He worked through Judas. That's the sermon for tonight. I'm not going to spoil it now. You already heard it, right? God has to do this kind of work all the time. We just have to be careful how we speak as Christians, so that we're not putting our trust in those things rather than our trust in God himself, because we recognize that the devil can turn these blessings into idols. That's why I think here in Revelation, it kind of comes out of nowhere. But did you catch it? We haven't heard this since the opening letters, right? Those 7 letters to the 7 churches. Each one of them says, "If anyone has an ear, let him hear." And then he talks about being in prison and being killed with a sword and the patient endurance. In my estimation, this is going to be one of the most difficult things for the church to wrangle with. And I think our Lord is telling us that here when he says in this instance, especially in this instance with the beast out of the sea, "He who has an ear, let him hear." So my dear Christians, pay attention to this. Don't be so naive to think that the government has your best intention in mind, no matter what form of government that might take, or no matter who is leading that government right now. On both sides of things, I am seeing Christians getting darn near the line of putting their trust in princes and in mortal men who cannot save. Does that mean we have to disengage from government policy? Absolutely not. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that we have to recognize and be aware that the devil is very well doing his work through these earthly institutions of government, as he has been doing. And especially as we look at it in America today, and we're now not so naive to think about it, but as the attacks on the Christian church are becoming more and more and more direct, especially in these last 5 years, okay, this is something we need to be aware of. And I'm going to talk more about the tension, the balance of that when we get to some of these discussion questions on the back. A couple other passages here about the devil's work. The devil even worked in David, right? The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he incited David against them, so that he said, "Go, count Israel and Judah." So it says there that the Lord had David count the men. But then First Chronicles, relating the same story, it said Satan stood up against Israel and incited David to count Israel. You know, these times when God has to work with sinners and deal with sin, they get pretty darn messy. And it's really hard for us as a human being to distinguish between these things. And the story of Judas and the Passion, which I preach on tonight, is really no different than that. So, let's just let it be said here first. How do these passages explain the contradiction that the devil will use government? What we can expect is living as sinners in a sinful world, the devil is going to try to use all the blessings that God has given us, and against him, and against his church. Does that mean government? Yes, it absolutely means government. I'll get ahead of myself. Let's just leave it more open-ended there and say that when we get into too specific weeds, we get ourselves into problems. And it's best just to take a look back. And this calls for us. I'm not going to get ahead of myself. We're going to get to it in just a second. Let's go to the next question. There's this beast out of the sea, had one head that looked mortally wounded and had come back to life. It's likely this wound could be referring to a particular event in history. And we think, of course, in terms of the fourth beast, the one with all the horns and things like that from Daniel was talking about the Roman Empire. And of course, the Roman Empire for its, the first 500 years of since Christ they were the ones that were actively persecuting the church to death. Until Emperor Constantine came to the throne, his mother being a Christian already, and then Christianity was not only the outlawed religion, Christianity became the actual state religion. And of course then what happened? That completely backfired. And so that head, which the devil was using to destroy the church, was killed. It was dead. But now it's been raised to life to do the devil's work. And I really think, and I know some will disagree with me, again, we're getting a little too specific, but there has been something that came back out of Rome again, right? That took its place and that exists as a ruler here on earth. And that's the office of the papacy. I think it fits. I really, really think it fits. And we also look at how Rome talks about the ruling of the papacy over the faith of the people. It speaks like that all the time, right? Who rules the Catholic Church? It's actually the papacy. The Pope rules the Catholic Church. Even though the Catholic Church may exist in other governmental jurisdictions, it is a thing unto itself by its own doctrine. And that's where, we see the mixing of the church and state certainly there too. And that's where I really think that, it best fits that head that's wounded. Okay. Next one, give clear. Now, it mentioned about people worshiping the dragon and the beast out of the sea. And I think there's a very important connection that needs to be made here. Those that worship the dragon. If we're going to consider a class of people, we're not talking about devil worshipers, right? We're talking about unbelievers. Notice what unbelievers do. Unbelievers not only worship the devil, they also worship the government. And so I think it's very, very helpful here. I got ahead of myself a little bit. I actually started backwards here. I'm going to start with the last one on the click here. Be especially tuned into how unbelievers view government. And if you find yourself aligned with them, let that be a warning to you. Not only the fact that certain sides of our government promote things that are very, very ungodly and anti-scripture and outright sin. Just keep that in your mind. Keep that in your mind. How else do people worship the government? Well, is the government the giver? And to what extent has the government made itself the giver and the giver of all good? Has the government made itself into God, or are causing people to look at it as God? Certainly communism is reflective of that. It was kind of all backwards, though, because communism was to be common, right? Everything belonged to everybody else, but what did the government do? The government took it and made it their own and didn't give anything back. Or if they did, of course, they became God and they decided who was going to get what. Nazism, no different, right? Jews were of a lesser kind of human being if you weren't Aryan, right? If you were American, that goes with all different races and societies. I also would say this, our form of worship, look at time and energy devoted to politics. And that, again, if we're looking especially at partisanship in America, that's on both sides of things, right? Let's not be dumb. And let's see it for what it is. I've said it so many times, especially in the election cycle, with people on Facebook. Now, I'm not friends with any members on Facebook. That's just the policy that I have. And I've really pared down my Facebook, just not having connections with. It really was frustrating me how much more time and energy it seemed that Christians were putting into their politics than they were going to church or telling others about Jesus. If we'd spend more time telling others about Jesus than we did about, these, just imagine what that would be like and what that would look like in a Christian's life. Now, I'm not saying a Christian has to be disconnected from the government. And see, some of that has to do with being in America and to what extent the Lord has blessed us individually as citizens and doing our vocation as citizen, right, in participating in government. So we're going to do that. We are definitely going to do that. But just like any of the other blessings and vocations that God has given us, could being parents ruin my worship life? Absolutely, because if I'm taking my kids all over to every sporting event and everything like that, well, yeah, that can be too. Again, no different than anything else. Let's see here. One of the things you got to be aware of is, government, our attitude toward government being omnipotent or omniscient or knowing everything. Again, I think we've seen good examples of how that is definitely not the case. All right. How long is the beast given time to operate? We have 42 months, 3.5 years. Again, 1,260 days. Again, the New Testament era. It's during this period of time when the devil is going to solicit the help of the institution of earthly government to persecute the church. Last one here is give examples of how governments have blasphemed God and those who believe in his name. And I think that the helpful thing for us here is to have our spiritual antennas tuned a little bit to when government and governmental institution begins to teach things that God teaches us, especially in regards to morality. And of course, we could look to evolution and creation and those types of things. We could look at transgenderism and homosexuality. I just as I was thinking about this, I wanted to review, so I was speaking things more clearly. But one of the things, if you go into Christianity Today, by the way, Christianity Today and the Christian Science Monitor are actually very good resources to get a feel for what's going on in culture from a Christian perspective. Um, Things that aren't hyper partisan either. They're usually just trying to relate the facts, especially Christianity Today. I think does a very, very good job of balancing the things going on in our society and not so much against the politics of them all. But I went and because I knew it actually came up in a story here recently. You heard about the teacher at Brookfield, one of the Brookfield high schools that sent out the survey about sexual behavior of the teens, and it was an anonymous survey, blah 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 blah, and there was a big debate on whether or not the teacher should have done this. And then of course it came out that this is a standard questionnaire. This teacher, she just pulled questions from the standard state questionnaire about sexual behavior and plugged it into her class so that she could use it for illustration and discussion purposes in her health class. So first of all, it struck me, again, being reminded that, oh, in the public school you have to take these sexual behavior surveys and things like that. But then that led me to think today, and it reminded me of what our Christian elementary schools and our high school, especially in California, have to deal with when they have to teach sex ed to kindergartners. And especially, I was looking at examples of the 5th grade sex ed curriculum that is mandated by the California government to be taught in its public schools. Yeah, it's stuff that you see in hardcore porn. Let me put it that way. And then, people argue, well, parents can opt out of it. Well, yeah, to a certain extent, parents can opt out of it, but parents cannot opt their children out of, especially the kindergarten curriculum that talks about transgenderism and homosexuality. And if you don't think this is true, look it up. It is. This is the California. This is the governmental program of California in teaching sexuality to K through 12th graders in its midst. So this is an example of the government teaching the things of God. The government's not supposed to be doing this. It's overstepping its place in the two kingdoms. So especially look for how the government teaches the things of God and see that then as what it is here. It's blasphemy, right? We're taking these things of God and we're making it unholy. The human body, human life itself. You think of euthanasia or assisted suicide or abortion. These are the places that make it clear to us where the devil is doing his work with the beast out of the sea. I've said it so many times, especially in the past 18 months. If it's not clear to the Christian church that the devil and the beast of the sea are working very well together right now, we need to pull our heads out of the sand. Which leads us then to the next question. Oops. Let me go back. Which leads us to the next question here, and I don't have it on the screen, but it's on the page. How do we deal with this in our lives? And it points out to verse 10 there, especially. It calls for patient endurance, right? If anyone is to be in prison. Okay, it calls for patient endurance. So how do I balance this? Well, God has told me that I am not to disobey the government. The only time I can disobey the government is when the government commands me to do something to be in violation of God's will. And we've had some examples of that this past year where the government has told us that it's wrong to do something that God has told us we need to do. So in that case, what do we do? Do we disobey? Again, it's hard. It's easy to speak of these situations and say, well, I'm just going to do this. Where was I going with that? To what extent do I say I have to be rebellious against this government, this beast out of the sea? No. If it's not, if the government is not commanding me to disobey God, then I can't. Actually, rebelling against the government is sin, even if it is the beast out of the sea. Right? I just said it. Rebelling against the government is sin, even if it's the beast out of the sea. God does not call us to rebel. He calls us to have patient endurance. That's what he tells us to do. Now, in America, we have a challenge here because we have the ability to exercise our rights as citizens, our vocation as Christian citizens, to have our part and have our say in how the government works, how we vote, being in places of political as political leaders in governmental positions and things like that. We should do those things. We should use them without failing to realize that, in fact, the government and the earthly institution of government will often be acting as the beast out of the sea, as the devil is using it to do its work, right? We could look at medicine the same way, right? Medicine is a blessing from God in which he uses it to save lives all the time, right? But medicine has also been used to create all kinds of horrors, like abortion and assisted suicide and sexual reassignment surgeries and things like that. Again, example of the devil using something God has made for good for us into something evil. Now I got to get my Becker book here. Hold on. I was going to read for you. Let's see here. Oh, page 201. Where is it at here? Here it is. This is an example from Becker, and I think it gives us just so you know that your pastor's not out of his mind, okay? In making some of the connections on these things. So remember, Professor Becker was professor at the seminary in the 70s and early 80s. This is talking about the beast not hesitating to use the mouth of God that he has been given, opening his mouth to speak blasphemies against God. First of all, he blasphemes God's name. The name of God includes all the things we know about God. It is God's revelation about himself in the Holy Scriptures. It would be a mistake for us to imagine that this kind of blasphemy is found only in communist governments. When our own government supports the denial of God's creation in our public school system and the ridicule of Christianity in our universities, it joins in this blasphemy and demonstrates how easy it is for a secular government to become the devil's instrument. When Sweden, a nominally Lutheran country, requires religious education in its public school system that makes it difficult for teachers to defend an Orthodox Lutheran interpretation of the Bible, it also promotes blasphemy against God's word. I like that he picked up on the Sweden thing. Of course, we had a lot of connections with the Swedish Lutherans, but Sweden is still technically a Lutheran nation. But as my brother had one Swedish hockey player, Swede, as he was affectionately known as, he was Lutheran. He knew nothing about Lutheranism. He knew nothing about what the Lutheran Church taught. So, okay, so the beast out of the sea, I think we've handled it well enough. I don't think I left anything too open-ended that you would have a ton of questions or anything like that about, but if I do have time after the confirmation class finishes, we're at 52 minutes here, so it depends on what time I started it. If you want to hang around, if I'm not back up yet, I may be back up. Okay, so our schedule for the next 2 weeks, next week is Easter. No Bible class since we added the service. We have 3 services on Easter Sunday, so no Bible class on Easter Sunday. The Sunday after that, the second Sunday of Easter, Pastor Michael Otterstetter from Martin Luther College will be here, particularly to extend the gratitude from the college campus and from the college family on the large gift that we gave for the Congregational Partner Grant Program. He'll be preaching that week. He'll also be doing Bible class, at which I have invited the catechism students to be at as well, so that they can hear and see the work of Martin Luther College going on. So that's the week after Easter. So we have 2 weeks off from Revelation. Then when we come back, we're going to be doing it on the video because I need to get the confirmation students ready for examination those next about 3 weeks it's going to be. And then, so that'll take us into May. Where we go from there, I'm not quite sure yet. If we find by that time we'll know we have a vicar or not, and that'll determine how next fall is going to go or to what extent we're going to do Bible class this summer as we look. We're probably going to keep the 3-service schedule throughout the summer as well. So we'll talk more about that next time. And again, if I'm not up by now in how things are going, I may or may not be up. We'll just see how it goes.